everybody, and welcome to episode 17 of Cave Cat's movie and TV reviews. Once again with your favorite host, the one and only Cave Cat. Wow, the last time I reviewed an animated series focusing on a dog was back when I reviewed the Scooby-Doo franchise for the 13th episode. You're probably wondering what I'm talking about. Well, this is a little bit of an interesting yet bizarre subject. You see, back in 1985, Steven Spielberg, fresh off the boat from directing the hit films Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1941, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and especially E.T. the Extraterrestrial and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, before later going on to work on Don Bluth's An American Tale and The Land Before Time, decided to try his hand at producing a TV series, that series becoming known as Amazing Stories. A brief synopsis about the series. Amazing Stories is an anthology series, almost similar to that of The Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits, or even Night Gallery, that focuses on fantastical elements that rival those of the three shows that I just mentioned earlier, though a little bit different from those shows. But anyway, the second season of the show introduced an episode that spun off a show that is the subject of today's episode. You see, on February 16th, 1987, which is a few months before I was born, mind you, the show released their first and only animated episode called Family Dog, which followed the titular family dog as he finds himself constantly tormented and abused by his family, the Binsfords. And also, no, this is not in any way related to Family Guy. The interesting thing about this episode is that it was actually written and produced by Brad Bird. Yes, the Brad Bird, who would later go on to write several episodes of The Simpsons, most notably Marge vs. the Monorail, as well as also producing and directing The Iron Giant, before going to work for Pixar, where he directed The Incredibles and its sequel Incredibles 2, along with Ratatouille. It's amazing that a current Pixar staff member and former Simpsons writer was actually responsible for animating an episode for a live-action anthology series that usually focused on paranormal and fantasy elements. Then 6 years later, in 1993, Brad Bird teamed up with Paul Dini and Sherry Stoner to produce an animated series based on the Family Dog episode of Amazing Stories, and we ended up getting Family Dog the series. Much like the series that it spun off from, Family Dog was produced by Universal Television and Amblin Entertainment in association with Warner Brothers Television and Nelvana. So yes, this is actually the third time that I'm reviewing a Nelvana animated series, even though it barely counts. Now as for the series itself, is it as good as the episode that it was spun off from? The answer to that question would be no. The series is basically just one roller coaster ride after another, as it focuses on the dog himself getting abused and relentlessly tormented by the Binsford family. And the Binsfords themselves really make themselves come across as being unlikable. Skip, the patriarch of the family, is basically what you would get if you combined Peter Griffin from Family Guy and Eustace Begg from Courage the Cowardly Dog and really amped up their negative qualities to 11, especially since he often refers to the dog as stupid dog, much like Eustace would later do. Bev, the mother, despite being more down-to-earth than Skip is, also comes across as being rather oblivious and unaware of what the dog really wants. And as for the two Binsford children, there's Billy, the older son, who's basically like a cross between Bart Simpson, Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes, and Split Kit from the 1980s Garbage Pail Kids cartoon, with the reason being that he likes to delight in causing trouble, especially to the dog, but with none of Calvin's occasional bouts of kindness or even Split Kit's hidden depths of doing the right thing, even though in the case of the latter, their voices sound a little bit similar. Then there's the younger daughter, Buffy, who's just a spoiled brat, almost like Angelica from Rugrats. You know, it's funny the way I mentioned The Simpsons just earlier, considering the fact that the series is just an attempt to try and cash in on the success of The Simpsons. I'm beginning to understand why my mom wouldn't let me watch a VHS of the show that we got from the library years ago when we watched just a little bit of it. It all stems from the fact that the show prides itself on black comedy, sadist humor, and the way that the characters indulge in insults and profanity. It's just deplorable. I recently watched a few episodes of the show a while back, and I can see why critics and audiences the world over panned the show for its unlikable characters and its attempt to be as commercial as The Simpsons. Not to mention that the plots for the show are just simple and rather basic, such as the characters entering the dog in a dog show, going to the zoo, going to the beach, and more. It's no surprise that the show only aired for 10 episodes instead of the proverbial 13 like most shows usually do per season. It's even worse than the third season of Adventures from the Book of Virtues, because with that one, at least it still had a little bit of funny parts, but this show just had a complete lack of actual comedy. And everything that the poor dog has to go through, it's almost like the Mindy and Button segments from Animaniacs, which is pretty ironic, since Sherry Stoner, who worked on the show, would later go on to work on Animaniacs, which ended up becoming rather successful in stark contrast to the show, while Stoner herself would also provide the voice of Slappy Squirrel from Animaniacs as well. With each episode of the series, you can't help but feel a sense of sympathy for the poor dog and how poorly the Bensfords treat him, even though there are times when the Bensfords actually do care for each other and for the dog, but still isn't enough to save the show. With how terrible the show is, as well as how unlikable the characters are, I think it's safe to say that Family Dog gets 4.5 stars. It's really sad the way a show spun off from an episode of a Steven Spielberg-produced TV series ends up not living up to its expectations. And Steven Spielberg is a pretty respected director, even to this day, even if he didn't actually work on the Family Dog series. That honor actually goes to Brad Bird himself, or should I say dishonor. At least after this big disaster, Brad Bird still tried again when he made The Iron Giant, even though that film ended up being a box office bomb. And when he joined Pixar and tried again with making The Incredibles and Ratatouille, at least it was a big comeback to his career at the time. And just recently, I heard that his next feature is a film called Ray Gun, which I have no idea what that is, but we'll just have to wait and see as time goes on now, shall we? So with that, another episode of Cave Cat's movie and TV reviews has come to an end. As mentioned before, be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more episodes, or whatever video I'll do next. So until next time, later!